Hello, everybody. My name is Brent Manning, and I'm here wearing two hats as current board president of the Craft Maltsters Guild and also as co-founder of Riverbend Malt House in Asheville, North Carolina. And excited to talk with you this morning about the topic of building a value proposition for craft malt. We're covering some basics and then dive a little bit deeper into the world of craft malt throughout the course of the talk, and then we'll wrap up with some questions. So, first, a little bit about me. My name is Brent Manning, like I say, co-founder of Riverbend and the Guild. In a previous life, I worked as a stream and wetland biologist on the coast of North Carolina. And when the housing market collapsed, I went looking for a new job. And as Brian and I, my other co-founder, joke, we created one. And Riverbend has grown steadily since 2010 and celebrating our 10th year. And I'm currently involved with product development, QA/QC, and sales, customer service. I got a master's degree from University of North Carolina at Wilmington and my Bachelor of Science from NC State. So what exactly is malt? Simply put, malt is the soul of beer. You can have beer without hops, but you cannot have beer without malt. We produce malt from a wide array of small grains: barley, wheat, rye, oats, corn, millet, you name it, and triticale. And basically what's going on when you produce malt is you walk the small grains through a three-step process involving steeping, germination, and kilning. And all of this is designed to develop, to manage an enzymatic digestion of the cell walls as they are converted from starches or digested into starches and simple sugars. Process takes about 7 days door to door to execute. So the first step is steeping. Sounds pretty simple, right? You put the grain under water over a period of 2.5 days. It undergoes 3 wet-dry cycles. So as we learned in our training class years ago, barley is not a fish, so it can't live underwater. So it needs these wet-dry cycles to slowly build the moisture content in a method that's really highly controlled. We want even hydration to occur across the kernels so that those digestive enzymes can make their way across the entire body of the kernel in an even fashion. This whole process sounds simple, but it's really challenging to balance. You have different ambient temperatures that you're dealing with, different water temperatures that you're dealing with on a seasonal basis, and all of these different variables can have a dramatic impact on how fast or slow the water comes into the kernel. And so we're shooting for a target between 44 and 46. Some varieties of barley like a little bit more moisture, some like a little bit less. So yet another variable to kind of pick through as we're working with different crop years of barley. So from steeping, we jump into germination. And this is really kind of where the maltster's art begins to play a more important role. We've got a limited suite of raw materials to play with, but we can build out a pretty impressive catalog of different malts using relatively few ingredients. And we start building the foundations of different flavors by managing this germination period differently. Typically, we'll be working in a room or GKV, germ kiln vessel, that's around 60 to 62 degrees Fahrenheit. And we'll be modulating these temperatures slightly over a 3 to 5 day period. There'll also be some, if we're on the floor malt side of things, we'll see wider variability because one of the big things that's occurring during germination is a lot of heat is generated as a byproduct of the digestive process. And so we pull the rake through or we turn it with an auger to allow this heat to escape and break up that rootlet material that's forming a fairly aggressive mat inside of the grain bed there. You can see the corn sample there in my hand. The rootlets are pretty large and succulent, and all of those rootlets can really bind together to act like a blanket to hold heat in place. So on the floor and in the GKVs, we're turning the grain 3 times a day, morning, mid-afternoon, and late evening, to allow that heat to escape and get some fresh air in there. Um, the picture in the center there shows what's actually happening. As you go left to right, you're seeing a germinating kernel stained, and what it's showing there is the breakdown of the beta glucans and cell walls inside of each kernel as it progresses through this 3 to 5 day period. So the far right is what we're looking for. There is a nice, complete, and even breakdown of the cell walls inside of each kernel. So kilning, we're now anywhere from 4 to 6 days deep in the process. We've got a properly modified kernel where we've broken down all those cell walls, and now we essentially need to stop the process, because if it keeps going, we'll actually start growing a barley or a wheat stalk, and we don't want that to occur, obviously. So we're essentially tricking this plant into growing by creating these perfect conditions, and once it's converted all that cell wall material into starch or simple sugar, we need to basically dry it down immediately so that that conversion process halts at the perfect time to maximize extract. So we do that by providing large amounts of air into the body of the piece of malt, I should say. So the kiln in the picture there, that's our 2-ton floor malt kiln, and think of it kind of like a brew house in the sense that we have a perforated stainless steel floor in that, a plenum underneath, and we stack the barley or whatever grain that we're working with about a meter deep on that perforated stainless steel floor. And the thing that looks like a giant file cabinet is where all the heating elements are. And so we're forcing air across an indirect heat exchanger. That hot air comes into the bottom and in through the grain bed to begin removing moisture. So the kiln graph above the picture of the kiln itself is just a highly stylized version of what we're talking about when we go through these 3 steps of kilning over a 24-hour period. So the blue line represents moisture content, relative humidity in the grain. The black line represents the 3 steps of temperature in free, forced dry, and curing. As you can see, they're escalating from anywhere between 120 degrees Fahrenheit to well north of 200 Fahrenheit. The red line represents the grain bed temperatures as well. So we want to manage that really, really closely. If you get too dry too quickly, you lose an opportunity to develop some nice, bready, sweet flavors. If you go too wet too long with too warm of temperatures, you can denature enzymes and you can have unwanted color development. So, really important that we keep a tight eye on as maltsters when we're talking about kilning grain if we want to hit a certain flavor profile or color number. So, a lot of where the flavor development is managed is in that second step, that force dry area, where we're typically recirculating warm, moist air and setting the table for curing. Where if we go above 194, we're actually tipping into getting some Maillard reactions going inside of the grain. So really this is again where the maltster's art comes in, is we have to have a properly engineered system to deliver large volumes of air into the grain bed to dry it down effectively, um, but not so much that it fluidizes the bed and makes the grain look like popcorn popping. So really important to nail all these little engineering factors so that we can then go into the more sort of chef mode of controlling flavor development. So again, this should take about 24 hours door to door, maybe a little longer if we're kilning a Munich style malt where we really want to build an almost excessive amount of bready sweet character into the malt. So, but So, who produces malt? The short answer is malt is an international commodity, a majority of which is produced in Western US, Western Canada, and Western Europe by large. So, we've got, as you might expect, a lot of the larger malt houses are located close to the traditional barley producing regions around the world. And these facilities produce large scale batches anywhere from 200 to 500 metric tons. Um, and they make really consistent products. But in the case of craft malt, we offer an alternative, a more local option in most cases. So I'll speak a little bit more to that. So Craft Malt's beginning, first Craft Malt House opened in 2008 in Colorado, and additional industry growth was seen through the following decade when craft brewing was really experiencing crazy growth. If anyone remembers the days of, consistently seeing, 10 to 15% annual growth, craft beer was really busting loose at that point. I know in North Carolina, when we started in 2010, we were around 60 breweries, and we're well north of 300 now, a decade later. So definitely emblematic of that growth. But so craft malt was really bolstered by the local food movement that was going on. I always kind of tell people, we're kind of the farmers market equivalent, of providing this key ingredient for craft beer. We've got more conscientious beer drinkers out there as well. People want to know where their ingredients are sourced, and in some cases, which specific farmer was involved in this process. So all of this was sort of building to a grassroots organization to help foster growth in the industry and develop best practices, et cetera. And so to that point, the North American Craft Maltsters Guild comes onto the scene, and so we incorporated as a 501c6 trade association in July of 2013 with the mission to promote and sustain the tradition of craft malting in North America and beyond. Now, provide service and resources to our members and uphold the highest quality and safety standards. So what started as a humble meeting in the brew house of our mutual friends in Denver has now blossomed into a pretty amazing organization that's driving a lot of fun initiatives that we'll talk about a little bit more later. So how do we define craft malt? We define it as small producers, typically looking at annual production between 5 and 10,000 metric tons. We define it as local, sourcing at least 50% of your grains within a 500-mile radius. So this is essentially a map, a roadmap for regional production. Uh, a lot of folks might define a smaller radius, but when we talk about small grains for a variety of geographic factors, we need to throw a little bit larger hoop around it to hit these thresholds. To put things in perspective, the closest major malt house to Asheville, North Carolina, is in Wisconsin, and barley for that organization is sourced from Wyoming. So we're talking about a 2,000-mile trip there. Independent ownership. We kind of took this page as an inspiration from the Brewers Association. We wanted to make sure that ownership was independent and not to exceed 25% from a non-craft malt entity. So how is craft malt different? And this is the really fun thing that I love sharing with people is that we've got so many different things going on. In the Southeast and in throughout much of the Mid-Atlantic, we're typically working with winter varieties of grain. So barley that's planted in October and not harvested until June, where our friends out west will be working with spring barleys that are typically planted in late May and harvested in August. So we've got different varieties we're working with, different climates we're growing in, different soils we're working in. Um, the other fun thing is equipment. We have a wide variety of craft malt producers using different approaches to each of those three steps that we walk through. And this is what's really fun is I could share my recipe for making a British style pale ale malt with someone else in the Western United States, and their equipment and their barley are going to have an impact on the flavor profile of that finished malt. So um, I really love that. So it's an opportunity to truly explore terroir in these grains. And to borrow a phrase from our local food advocacy group, local food is thousands of miles fresher. So we always love hearing from our customers, that, oh, my brewery smells like a bakery when I work with your malt. And I think that's really emblematic of what craft malt can bring to the table. So where can I find it? Uh, Visit craftmalting.com and check out our Craft Malt Finder. This is a uh, database of all the producers that are members of our organization. So you can see we're spread throughout the United States and Canada, and we're actually building a steadily growing batch of international producers across the UK, Japan. So really fun to see this thing grow on a global scale. So a word on price. This is kind of something that people immediately jump to, but I always like to sort of provide a bit of a generic example of what it means to work with a premium priced craft malt, because the answers might surprise you. And so if we take, let's say, a 10-barrel batch that has a 500 pounds of base malt involved, and maybe a large scale supplier is charging 60 cents a batch and a craft maltster is charging 90 cents a pound, the delta on that is $150, which is, is significant. It adds up. But when you compare that to the per pint price, we're seeing that it's roughly 1% of the cost of a $6 pint. And most breweries, tap rooms, etc., have different pricing tiers, whether it's a big double IPA or a light sessionable lager. They might add a quarter or two for that, and especially when we put these products into different buckets on the menu. I've always been tried to champion the idea of, well, I know we've got IPAs and malty and pilsner and whatever, but what if we had a local section that kind of spoke to some of the beers that are being brewed that fold in craft malt or local hops or whatever, and maybe they are a quarter more a pint. I think the consumer's expectation is that local and premium ingredients cost a little bit more, and most are willing uh, to take that trip with you and to support that move. So just kind of put that out there as a bit of an example of what can happen in the tap room. This gets a little tougher when we talk about package and distributed products, but that's definitely something that we're working on to try to extend that messaging out into grocery and in the long run, maybe even convenience stores. So you found your local maltster and you're excited. You want to take a leap into this space. You know, take the time to really meet with that maltster, learn their story, sample their products. See if you can schedule a hot steep demo. This is basically like making a hot tea with a given malt sample. And I think this is a really fun opportunity to explore not only specialty malt flavor profiles, but also get down into the weeds when we talk about base malt differences. We've done some really interesting side by sides with, putting our malt up against fine examples from, Belgium, France, Canada, etc. And it's really fun to see the differences that come out when you do these sort of really nice, straightforward comparisons. The other thing I always like to recommend is build a recipe with some of these products that your local maltster is providing. This is uh, it can create customer confusion and potentially dissatisfaction if you take a tried and true recipe for a pale ale that you've been making for 5 years, and you change and you put craft malt into it. Well, maybe that disrupts that classic profile that your regulars are looking for, and they're not exactly stoked about that. So I always kind of ask or recommend like start with something fresh. You know, what flavors jump out at you from that hot steep demo that you'd like to play to in a given recipe? You know, maybe a twist on a classic Kolsch or American lager is right where you need to go. Several of our breweries kind of signal a change in sourcing practices with a co-brand. This is a great example from Crooked Can down in Florida, you know, where they speak to it boldly on their label. You know, this is Riverbend Rye. Come check it out. We're working with a craft maltster in North Carolina now. So these are great ways to sort of begin to tell the story to your customer. So speaking of story, we got to talk about education. You know, this is super important. It's a great way to empower your staff to sell beer. You know, a lot of times we see that if the staff is brought up to speed on some of the new releases that are featuring local high quality craft malt, that they get excited about it, and that excitement translates into conversations with the customers across the bar and more pints to be sold. You know, the Brewers Association has done tons of surveys on this, and it's well documented that customers are looking beyond flavor. They want to know where are these ingredients coming from, you know, and you know, coming out hopefully out of the pandemic, that you know this is a great opportunity. I'm sure many of you have experienced staff turnover rates. This is a great opportunity to educate and reboot the folks that are at the front of the house, and you know, again, sort of meshing approachable styles like Kolsch, like American Lager. Into this locally sourced message, you really can check a lot of boxes for folks that are coming in to the tap room to see what your organization is all about. So the Craft Malt Certified Seal. So this is something that the Maltsters Guild launched in September of 2019 as a way to really signal to customers, really more in the sort of package space, that grocery, you know, that these products are special and different and support local. You know, we really wanted to provide a branding element that would speak to and allow for differentiation across different environments. And so this seal, you know, clearly signals that there's an agricultural element involved in the beer that you're potentially picking up out of the grocery store, and offers an invitation to visit craftmalting.com to learn a little bit more about that. And so this is a great example of how, you know, a craft brewery can join up with their craft maltster, become a member of the guild, take advantage of all the educational resources, and really get a branding element that differentiates you at market. So building the halo effect. So we start with the seal, start with the malt house logo. You know, mirror a lot of what the farm to table restaurants are so good at, which is messaging around ingredient selection and how that impacts the finished product. You know, we educate staff and customers about this. They're building that brand impact for you. You know, the goal here is you want the halo. You create effective campaigns that align your brewery with these local farmers, local businesses, and it really sort of sets you apart in an ever growing sea of craft breweries. And so I think it's super important to sort of fold one or all of these elements into your decision to get involved with craft malt, because when you build customer awareness, that, you know, that's going to drive loyalty, and that ultimately drives growth. I'll put in a shameless plug here for the Craft Malt Conference coming up in Portland, Maine in February of 2022. If you'd really love to learn more and take a deep dive into craft malt, that's an excellent opportunity to do so. So appreciate your time, and I'll end my show here and we'll take a few questions. All right. Appreciate it, guys. Thanks for your time.